Hey guys, DJ here at Top Deck Cards in the Game. Today I'm going to do a deck profile for Bloody Snow White for Force of Will. It is a red-white deck, real-ish. We're playing white stones just for the slow flip on Snow White if we don't have Poison Apple. Snow White's flip regularly is white-red 2, but you can pay 1 and discard a Poison Apple to just flip her like that. On the flip side, Snow White is a 13/13 creature with target attack. It also has tap to rest a J-Roller or a Resonator, and you can pay 1 and discard a Poison Apple to destroy a Resonator. So this card does a lot when it's flipped over. This deck exists almost strictly as a counter to Bahamut. It forces your opponent to not flip their ruler too early, or they will have to play the game on no mana, since in their untap you will always you'll flip your Snow White after they flip their Bahamut. Then in their untap you will always tap their ruler down and not allow them to make any more stones for the rest of the game. This slows Bahamut down by at least a turn, forcing them to make 2 stones before they can flip their roller. And at that point, the goal is for you to play a slightly slower red deck with a lot more value cards and mid-range elements than they do, so that you can overrun them, since their deck is built to play the fastest game possible. Going into our stones, we do have these 2 red-white stones, like I said, for the slow flip, though we do not play any white cards in our main board anywhere. We then have 1 Molest and 1 Little Red the Pure Stone, just for some extra value, some extra damage, no real reason not to play them. Then 6 basic red stones. We do only play 2 of these because, well, really just fear of split, though it's not the most relevant thing in the world. Some people do play it in their Bahamut decks, and the extra utility we get out of playing more copies of Heat Ray is really just less than the value we get from not losing the split ever. Going into our deck, we are a Regalia deck. We're playing a red deck that's, got a relevant ruler. So we have 4 copies of Leviathan. This card lets us do a lot more damage, has a lot more speed to the deck. You can burst your opponent out, like pitch an apple, flip Snow White, attack for 15 is a lot of damage, especially against slower decks or if your opponent has played fearing the Snow White all game. So they've played slower. It just gives you a ton of burst, which is really cool. After that, we have our 1-drop creatures. We have 4 copies of Guinevere, 4 copies of Black Goat, and 4 copies of Hunter in the Black Forest. The 1-drops are important in this deck because they force your opponent to not flip their Bahamut turn 1. If you have one of these in play, for instance, and your opponent wanted to do like the pitch Regalia, flip Bahamut with 0 stones played, they would just lose the game. You would literally just attack them to death with Hunter while you don't let them flip or make stones ever again. Yes, they might eventually top another Regalia, but that A, isn't the most likely thing, and B, is not a great plan for them. Guinevere in general is actually just a super high value card though in this deck. You're going to use it a lot, and Black Goat just complements her incredibly well, letting you sack off creatures that would have died anyway or that just have served their purpose already. And getting the Black Goat into your graveyard to deal with creatures, just get some values. Super strong. For 2-drops, we have 4 copies of Lancelot, arguably one of the strongest cards in the game, and the only 2-mana spell I would consider playing in Bahamut. This card is just so good, especially in a slower red deck where you're able to actually get some value out of it, pump it sometimes, and guarantee you have 2 stones especially. We also have 4 copies of Whelp Drake. Whelp Drake is a card that locally we have deemed absolutely insane, and it's sort of starting to make the meta a little bit inbred where everyone's playing Whelp Drake and now everyone's playing Susanoo in every deck since they can come into play for basically free, which isn't the biggest deal in the world. If you play this card smart, you can play it to block against Bahamut very safely. They're not going to have Susan, so you're just safe to play it and block. Against other decks, you can save this card in your hand, sandbag it to play it later in the game, then discard it with, or sacrifice it rather, with Guinevere before your opponent has a chance to play Susanoo and use it to kill a creature. If your opponent has something like a Lancelot in play even, this is a little bit costly, but you can sacrifice your player Whelp Drake, sack it to get a couple cards deeper into your deck, ditch a Black Goat, then use another 2 mana to kill your opponent's creature for no real card value lost. You have spent your whole turn, and well, maybe your whole turn, but you have spent 3 mana to do so, but you've just gained so much value from it. You spent no real cards, you've just used cards that were kind of sitting there idly anyway, and you've dealt with something like a Lancelot, because that can do up to 600 damage for very little cost. After that, we have the biggest creature in the deck. We do also play 2 copies of Susanoo. Not necessarily because of Whelp Drake, like I said, but because it's incredibly strong in the meta right now against Bahamut when you're playing a slower red deck. If your opponent flips their roller and oopses, like just letting it get tapped repeatedly, you're able to just play this guy for 3 mana while you can keep their Bahamut tapped, so it just gets a ton of damage in. That's a super high value creature. We also play 3 of his sword, the Amno Habakiri. This card is incredibly good in this deck as well. Putting it on Lancelot creates a ton of damage and an incredible threat. Even just tacking it on something like a Hunter in the Black Forest just creates like a 7/7 that forces extra damage through it, can trade, not even trade, can just kill your opponent's creatures very reasonably. And when you draw these two cards together, a lot of the time the game just ends. Obviously, we're playing a Snow-White deck, so we have 4 copies of Poison Apple to flip our ruler. This is the card that gives us speed and the reliable ability to just block our opponent's Bahamut's out of the game. It's very important if you're playing against Bahamut to basically just mulligan for Poison Apple. It's a lot like when you're playing Bahamut and you just mulligan for swords. This card is just too important to not have. Finally, we have 7 removal spells, 4 Thunders, and 3 Demon Flames. The Bahamut matchup's super good, so you don't have to play crappier removal spells like Crime and Punishment or Duel of Truth to try to deal with Bahamut. You're just going to lock him down anyway. So now we just have to deal with their wings. And these cards do that the most reliably. You could argue that a card like Duel of Truth or Crime and Punishment would be better because it deals with their Lancelots so well. But 1, we're okay with trading our Lancelots for theirs. 2, we're able to put Amno, whatever, on our littler creatures to slam in. And 3, we have the little Whelp Drake, Black Goat interaction to deal with them. So you're not as worried about dealing with those creatures as some other decks are. You're more interested in burning out their little guys and not letting them rush you down, even if you lock their roller up, since you're going to be playing a very low resource game too. So you don't want to fold because they were able to rush you down a little bit harder than you were able to rush them down. This deck is, like I said, just really a step slower than Bahamut, but it does so with a great Bahamut matchup anyway, due to the ability to lock them down. It actually struggles against decks like Vlad because you give up a lot of your speed and power. Not necessarily struggles either, it's just a much harder matchup. You give up a lot of your speed and power in order to gain a huge edge in the Bahamut matchup. Where this deck really struggles, though, like a super negative Game 1 matchup, is against Kayn. Because of this, we have a pretty dedicated sideboard plan for it. We have 4 copies of Flames of Outer World and 4 copies of Magic Stone of Scorchbales in our sideboard to help deal with it. Again, I was talking about the Vlad matchup being pretty average. We also have 4 copies of Split Heaven and Earth for that one. And we did have 3 copies of Duel of Truth. Duel comes in against Kayn and various other decks where we just have some sort of threat we need to deal with that Snow-White will definitely be big enough to kill. But yeah, this is the most key part of the sideboard. These are the 8 cards that matter the most. You bring these in and just kill your opponent's Kayn. The matchup's suddenly really easy. Duel of Truth helps with that, and 4 splits really just shores up the Vlad matchup enough. It's not a terrible matchup, but when you bring in 4 splits, it becomes pretty easy. If somebody in your area has a really well-tuned Vlad list that you're having a ton of trouble with, you could also change some number of cards out to also include like 3 copies or 2 copies of Surto. Maybe like cut one of these for a Surto and just jam one of these Scorchbales into your Magic Stone deck. And that'll really improve the matchup. The reason these aren't just in our Stone deck to begin with is because Kayn decks always play Split, and that is already one of our worst matchups, or not one of, just the worst matchup. So we weren't going to water that matchup down anymore by manning them. It might be correct to just roll with it though and accept losing game 1. That would require some more testing. I'm not sure how bad it is, but so far it's been pretty awful. But yeah, that's a full list with the sideboard. This is a deck that I think you can expect to compete pretty well for the near future. It's really strong against Bahamut. It's good enough against the rest of the field, and I think it's just a super strong choice. I'm surprised more people aren't playing it yet. I didn't really mention the Melgus matchup since that's like the 3rd or 4th other red Regalia deck. That matchup's fine too. It works out pretty similarly to Bahamut and Kayn even. It's just much easier to deal with Melgus than it is to deal with Kayn since he just dies to Thunder. So all in all, that's really all there is to this deck. It's super good, super consistent. It just trades a lot of the speed, not a lot, even a little bit of the speed that decks like Bahamut have for a much better grind game, a lot more removal and consistency. And it's just a definitely really good choice for the meta right now. I think if your local is infested with Bahamut, but you don't want to be the scumbag also playing it, you can play this deck and really give them a run for their money. So yeah, that's really all there is to this deck though, guys. It's a really interesting deck, not super difficult to play or anything. I hope you guys really like it. We're going to have a lot more Forcible content coming soon, so make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel to be kept totally updated. If you're not in the area, we will be having, or even if you are in the area especially, I guess, we'll be having an ARG Circuit Series event coming up on September 20th, so make sure you guys check that out. We expect it to be a really fun event. Hopefully it's got a great attendance. If you're interested in signing up or have any questions about it, let us know down below or message us on Facebook. We're going to do lots more videos, maybe even some features from the events or some top 8 deck lists on the channel. So, just keep posted, or we'll keep you posted. Keep checking the channel. You'll see a ton more Forcible content coming soon. And other than that, I will see you guys soon.